Teacher visits little girl. What she sees makes her call 911 in panic. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The morning bell at Pinewood Elementary School rang sharply at 8:15 as it did every Monday. Helen Monroe stood at her classroom door, greeting each of her first-grade students with a warm smile. 23 bright faces filed past her, some eager, some sleepy, all precious to her after 15 years of teaching. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe," chirped Ethan, his front tooth newly missing. "I made this for you," whispered shy Olivia, pressing a drawing into Helen's hand. But when little Daisy Williams shuffled through the doorway, Helen's smile faltered. The once vibrant 6-year-old moved like a much older soul, her shoulders hunched, blonde hair limp and unwashed. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, making her appear hollow, distant. "Good morning, Daisy," Helen said gently, kneeling to meet the child's gaze. "How are you feeling today?" Daisy's eyes briefly met Helen's before darting away. "Fine, Ms. Monroe," she mumbled, clutching her tattered backpack tighter. She hurried to her desk without another word. Helen watched her go, concern deepening the lines around her eyes. This was the third week she'd noticed the changes in Daisy. The girl who once raised her hand for every question, who giggled during story time, who skipped through the playground, had vanished. In her place was this quiet ghost who winced when she sat down and clutched her stomach during lessons. During morning circle, Helen observed Daisy from the corner of her eye. While other children fidgeted and whispered, Daisy sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When it was her turn to share weekend news, she simply shook her head, no words. At recess, while children exploded onto the playground with boundless energy, Daisy sat alone on a bench, watching her classmates with longing in her eyes. Helen approached her carefully. "Aren't you going to play today, Daisy?" "Remember how much you love the swings." Daisy shook her head. "My tummy hurts," she whispered. Helen sat beside her. "That's been happening a lot lately, hasn't it? Does your uncle know you're not feeling well?" Something flashed in Daisy's eyes. Fear? "He knows," she said quickly. "I'm okay." "Daisy, you can tell me if something's—" "I have to go to the bathroom," Daisy interrupted, sliding off the bench. She walked away with small, careful steps. Later that afternoon, while the children worked on their alphabet sheets, Helen saw Daisy press her hand against her stomach, her face contorting in pain. When she approached, she noticed Daisy hadn't eaten her lunch again. "Why didn't you eat, sweetheart?" Helen asked quietly. Daisy looked up, her blue eyes suddenly welling with tears. "If I sleep too much, the baby cries without stopping," she whispered, the non sequitur, revealing more than a direct answer ever could. The comment sent a chill through Helen's heart. After school, Helen approached her colleague Sarah in the teacher's lounge. "I'm really worried about Daisy Williams." Sarah sighed. "Some kids just have problems at home, Helen. We can't fix everything. But she's clearly unwell. I think something's seriously wrong. We've alerted counseling. The system works slowly. Just focus on teaching. That's what we're here for." Helen nodded, but inside she knew she couldn't just let this go. As the children filed out at dismissal time, Helen noticed Daisy was the last to leave, moving painfully slowly. "Daisy," Helen called softly. "Do you need help getting home?" "No, Ms. Monroe. Uncle Garrett doesn't like visitors." When Daisy turned to go, Helen noticed something alarming, a wet brownish stain seeping through the back of the girl's faded pink shirt. Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them. A silent plea from the child, an unspoken promise from the teacher. Helen watched Daisy shuffle down the hallway, her decision already made. She gathered her belongings quickly, heart pounding. Some rules were meant to be, broken. Some children couldn't wait for the system. Helen grabbed her car keys. She was going to that house today. Helen's blue sedan followed the winding country road that led away from town. Her knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as directions from the school records guided her deeper into the rural outskirts. The autumn trees blurred past in streaks of red and gold, but Helen barely noticed their beauty. Her mind kept replaying that brown stain on Daisy's shirt, the hollow look in the child's eyes. 20 minutes of driving brought her to a rusted iron gate hanging askew from stone pillars. Beyond it stood what must have once been an impressive Victorian mansion, now a shadow of former grandeur. Paint peeled from weathered clapboards, several windows were cracked or boarded, and the wide wraparound porch sagged dangerously at one corner. The mailbox confirmed she'd found the right place. Williams Harmon. My goodness, Helen whispered to herself, parking beside a sleek black luxury car that looked jarringly out of place in the dilapidated setting. As Helen approached the house, she heard a baby's wailing from inside. She hesitated at the bottom of the creaking porch steps, professional boundaries warring with moral obligation. Teachers weren't supposed to make home visits without approval, but something in her gut told her this couldn't wait. Helen knocked firmly on the door. No answer came, though the baby's cries continued. She knocked again, louder. This time, when still no one responded, she tested the knob. The door swung open with a long, eerie creak. "Hello?" Helen called, stepping cautiously into a grand but neglected foyer. "Daisy? Is anyone home?" She followed the sound of crying down a dimly lit hallway, past rooms filled with dust-covered furniture. The wailing led her to what once must have been a magnificent dining room. The scene that greeted her made her heart sink. 6-year-old Daisy knelt on the cracked marble floor, scrubbing vigorously with a ragged cloth. Beside her was a metal bucket of grayish water. In the corner, a baby, no more than 8 months old, cried in a playpen, red-faced and distressed. A toddler boy of about 3 sat beside the playpen, patting the baby's hand through the mesh, murmuring, "Shh, Charlie, shh." Daisy looked up, her face paling when she saw her teacher standing in the doorway. "Ms. Monroe," she gasped, dropping the cloth. You can't be here." Her eyes darted nervously toward the hallway. "Daisy," Helen said gently, moving toward her. "What's happening here? Where is your uncle?" "He had to go to town," Daisy explained hurriedly, resuming her scrubbing. "I need to finish before he comes back. Please, you should go." The toddler looked up at Helen with curious eyes. "Are you Daisy's friend?" he asked. "Yes," Helen answered, kneeling beside them. "I'm Ms. Monroe, Daisy's teacher." She glanced at the baby, who continued crying. "What's wrong with Charlie?" "He's hungry," Daisy whispered, not meeting Helen's eyes. "But I need to finish cleaning first. The floor has to be perfect." Helen noticed how Daisy winced as she moved, how she pressed her arm against her stomach between scrubs. "Daisy, when did you last eat?" The little girl shrugged. "Yesterday, I think. Toby and Charlie had the last cereal this morning." She looked up briefly, adding in a whisper that broke Helen's heart, "He says food is only for the strong ones." Helen fought to keep her expression neutral despite her rising alarm. "Let me help," she said, reaching for the cloth. "We'll finish faster together." As Daisy reluctantly allowed Helen to take over the scrubbing, Helen noticed how the child's wrists seemed impossibly thin, how her school uniform hung from her small frame. The baby's cries had subsided to whimpers, and the toddler, Toby, watched them with solemn eyes too old for his face. "Does your tummy hurt right now?" Helen asked quietly. Daisy nodded. "All the time now, but I'm not supposed to complain." The sound of tires on gravel outside made Daisy freeze. Her face drained of what little color it had. "He's back," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Please, Ms. Monroe, he doesn't like strangers. He'll be so angry." The front door opened, followed by footsteps in the foyer. Daisy scrambled to grab the cloth from Helen's hands, frantically resuming her scrubbing. "Daisy," called a deep, pleasant-sounding male voice. "Is someone here? I saw a car." Outside. Helen stood just as a tall, well-dressed man appeared in the doorway. His surprised expression quickly transformed into a charming smile, though his eyes remained cold as they assessed Helen. "Well," he said smoothly, "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I'm Helen Monroe, Daisy's teacher, Helen said, extending her hand while maintaining eye contact with the man. His grip was firm, his smile unwavering, but something in his gaze made her uneasy. Garrett Harmon, he replied, the children's uncle and guardian. What a surprise to receive a visit from Pinewood Elementary. His tone was pleasant, but the question beneath his words was clear. Why are you here? I've been concerned about Daisy, Helen explained, watching his reaction carefully. She's been having stomach pains at school and seems unusually tired. Today she seemed particularly unwell. Garrett's expression shifted to one of concerned surprise, so convincing that Helen might have believed it, if not for the scene she'd just witnessed. Oh, she hasn't mentioned anything to me. He turned to Daisy, who was still kneeling on the floor, head bowed. Daisy, sweetheart, why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well? Daisy's eyes remained fixed on the floor. I'm fine, Uncle Garrett. She's had several episodes at school, Helen pressed. Has she been taking any medication for her condition? A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed Garrett's face before his concerned mask returned. Ah, yes. The doctors mentioned something about that, but they said she'd likely outgrow it. Children have sensitive stomachs, don't they? The baby in the playpen began fussing again. Garrett glanced at the child with obvious irritation before smoothing his expression. Charlie's been a bit colicky, he offered by way of explanation. Keeps everyone up at night. Helen nodded, noting how Toby had shrunk back into the corner at his uncle's arrival. I noticed Daisy mentioned the baby crying at night. She seems very responsible for her age. Garrett chuckled, moving to place a hand on Daisy's shoulder. Helen didn't miss how the child tensed at his touch. Daisy's always been my little helper, haven't you, sweetheart? She loves looking after her brothers. He squeezed her shoulder. But I assure you, Ms. Monroe, I handle all the important responsibilities. Helen looked pointedly at the, cleaning supplies at Daisy's raw hands. I see. Garrett cleared his throat. We've been through a difficult transition since the children came to live with me. I'm still adjusting to parenthood. I understand, Helen said, though she didn't. Would it be all right if I helped Daisy with some of her schoolwork while I'm here? She's fallen behind on reading practice. Garrett seemed to consider this request, clearly wanting to refuse but aware it would appear suspicious. Of course, he finally said, though I do have some important calls to make. Perhaps another time would be better? It won't take long, Helen insisted gently. I brought her reading folder with me. With obvious reluctance, Garrett nodded. Very well. You can use the living room. Daisy, show Ms. Monroe the way, then finish your chores. Actually, Helen interjected, Daisy looks like she could use a break and the baby seems hungry. Garrett's smile tightened. I'll take care of Charlie. Daisy knows her responsibilities. Helen reached into her bag. I happened to bring some snacks. I always keep extras for my students. Perhaps Daisy could have something while we work? Before Garrett could object, Helen had produced a granola bar and an apple. Daisy's eyes widened at the sight of the food, though she didn't reach for it. Can I, Uncle Garrett? She asked in a small voice. Something unspoken passed between uncle and niece. A warning, perhaps, or a reminder. Fine, he said finally. But don't make a mess. Helen followed Daisy to a dusty living room with faded furniture. Once they were alone, Daisy virtually inhaled the granola bar, carefully wrapping the apple in a tissue and slipping it into her pocket. For Toby later, she explained in a whisper. As Helen opened the reading folder, she gently steered the conversation. Daisy, has a doctor looked at your tummy recently? Daisy shook her head. Not since summer. Uncle Garrett says the medicine costs too much now. Does it hurt all the time? Daisy nodded. Especially after eating. Sometimes there's blood. Her voice dropped even lower. But please don't tell Uncle Garrett I told you. He says complaining is for weak people. Helen fought to keep her expression neutral. What about your brothers? Are they seeing doctors? Only when they're really sick, Daisy said. Uncle Garrett gets the money for us, but he Says we waste it with doctor visits. From the other room came the sound of Garrett speaking, his voice completely different now, harsh and impatient. They heard the baby still crying. He doesn't like it when Charlie cries, Daisy whispered urgently. Please, Miss Monroe, you should go before he gets angry. Helen placed her hand over Daisy's. I'm worried about you, Daisy. Would you like me to help? For a moment, hope flickered in the child's eyes. Then fear extinguished it. If I tell anyone, they might take my brothers away, she whispered. I promised Mom I'd keep us together. The sound of Garrett's footsteps approaching made Daisy quickly open her book, pretending to read. Helen saw the fear in the little girl's eyes and made a silent promise of her own. She would not abandon these children to this house, to this man, whatever it took. Garrett appeared in the doorway, his earlier annoyance now hidden behind a practiced smile. How's the reading coming along? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Daisy's making good progress, Helen replied, giving the child an encouraging nod. She's very bright. Yes, she takes after her mother that way, Garrett said with a casual shrug. Unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of helping with schoolwork as much as I'd like. Running a business keeps me quite busy. Helen noticed how he emphasized his sacrifice, his burden. What business are you in, Mr. Harmon? Real estate development, he answered smoothly. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills, and there are many with 3 children to support. He checked his expensive watch. Speaking of which, I have an important call in 10 minutes with potential investors. Helen recognized the not-so-subtle hint. She closed Daisy's book but made no move to leave. I'd love to come back regularly to help Daisy with her reading. Perhaps twice a week after school? The suggestion clearly displeased Garrett, though his smile remained fixed. That's very kind, but unnecessary. We manage just fine. I insist, Helen said firmly. It's part of our school's new outreach program for promising students who need extra support. The program didn't exist, but Garrett wouldn't know that. A tense silence stretched between them before Garrett relented with a stiff nod. Tuesdays and Thursdays, then. But please call ahead. My schedule is unpredictable. Of course, Helen agreed, knowing she'd made a small but significant victory. She turned to Daisy. I'll see you tomorrow at school, okay? And I'll be back on Thursday to read more. Daisy's eyes darted between her teacher and her uncle, conflicted between hope and fear. Thank you, Ms. Monroe, she whispered. As Helen gathered her things, Charlie's crying resumed from another room. Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Daisy, go take care of your brother, he instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Daisy hurried from the room without a backward glance. Helen noted how quickly the child responded to the command, like a well-trained soldier. Garrett escorted Helen to the front door. As they passed the dining room, she glimpsed Toby still sitting quietly in the corner, watching his sister attempt to soothe the crying baby. Mr. Harmon, Helen said carefully as they reached the door. I couldn't help but notice Daisy mentioned she hasn't had her medication recently. Her medical records at school indicate she has a chronic intestinal condition that requires regular treatment. Garrett's charming facade slipped for just a moment. School records? He asked sharply. You've been investigating my niece. It's standard procedure when a student shows symptoms of illness, Helen explained calmly, though her heart raced at his sudden intensity. The school nurse is quite concerned. Garrett composed himself quickly. I appreciate your concern, Ms. Monroe, but family medical decisions are precisely that, family decisions. We've been exploring alternative treatments, less pharmaceutical intervention. I see, Helen said, not seeing at all. And has Daisy seen a specialist recently to monitor her condition? His smile tightened. I don't believe my family's medical appointments are the business of Pinewood Elementary. The charm had evaporated completely now. While I appreciate your interest in Daisy's education, please remember your role as her teacher, not her guardian. The warning was unmistakable. Helen nodded, unwilling to push further and risk losing her newfound access to the children. Of course. I'll see you Thursday then. As she walked to her car, Helen felt Garrett's eyes on her back. Once inside her vehicle, she exhaled shakily, gripping the steering wheel to steady herself. Something was deeply wrong in that house, more than neglect. Though that alone was serious enough. The disparity between Garrett's appearance and the children's living conditions, his expensive car alongside their evident hunger. As Helen started her car, an elderly woman emerged from the neighboring property, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. On impulse, Helen rolled down her window. "Excuse me," she called. "I'm Daisy Williams's teacher. I was just visiting." The woman approached cautiously, her weathered face creased with suspicion. "Are you now? First visitor those children have had in months." She peered at Helen more closely. "You actually got inside?" "Yes, I'm concerned about Daisy's health." The old woman glanced toward the mansion, then leaned closer to Helen's car. "Those poor children," she murmured. "No one ever stays long enough to help." "What do you mean?" Helen asked, pulse quickening. The woman's eyes darted nervously toward Garrett's house. "Can't talk now, he watches." She straightened, speaking louder. "Nice meeting you. Good day." As the neighbor hobbled away, Helen sat frozen in her car. The woman's words echoed in her mind. No one ever stays long enough to help. Helen started her engine, a newfound determination hardening her resolve. She would be different. She would stay. For Daisy. For all three children. Whatever Garrett was hiding, she would find out. The school counselor's office was warm and inviting, with motivational posters and children's artwork adorning the walls. But the atmosphere between Helen and Marjorie Wheeler, Pinewood's veteran counselor, was anything but comfortable. "You did what?" Marjorie asked, setting down her coffee mug with deliberate slowness. "Helen, you know home visits require administrative approval and parental consent. I was worried," Helen replied, leaning forward in her chair. "And I was right to be. Those children are living in terrible conditions. Daisy is seriously ill, and she's acting as the primary caregiver for her younger brothers." Marjorie sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, I understand your concern, but we have protocols. For a reason. If you suspect neglect, you file a report with Child Protective Services. You don't show up unannounced at a guardian's home." "I've been teaching for 15 years, Helen countered. "I know when something's seriously wrong. Daisy needs medical attention she's not getting." She mentioned blood. "I know about the Williams children," Marjorie interrupted, lowering her voice. "This isn't the first time concerns have been raised." Helen straightened. "What do you mean?" Marjorie glanced toward her closed door before responding. "Last year, Daisy's kindergarten teacher filed a report. CPS investigated, but nothing came of it. How is that possible? If they'd seen what I saw." "Garrett Harmon is very persuasive," Marjorie said carefully. By the time the caseworker arrived, everything appeared in order. The children were clean, fed, the house was presentable. Harmon had documentation for all their medical care, explained that Daisy's condition was being treated, that they were just going through a temporary rough patch after losing their parents. Helen frowned. "He staged it. He must have." "Possibly," Marjorie admitted. "But legally, CPS couldn't do more, without concrete evidence. And afterward," she hesitated. "What?" "Daisy's teacher was served with a harassment complaint. Nothing came of it legally, but she transferred to another district at the end of the year. Harmon has connections, Helen. Powerful ones." Helen absorbed this information, her determination only growing. "I don't care about his connections. Those children need help." Marjorie studied her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Just be careful. Start documenting everything. Daisy's symptoms, attendance patterns, any comments she makes about home. Build a case." Methodically. Helen nodded, already pulling out her notebook. "I've been tracking her absences. There's a pattern. She misses school most often on Mondays and Fridays." "That could be significant," Marjorie agreed. "What about her academic performance?" It's declined dramatically over the past month, and physically she's lost weight. Her clothes hang on her. Helen flipped through her notebook. I checked her records. She has a condition called inflammatory bowel disease. It requires daily medication and regular monitoring. And you believe she's not receiving treatment? She told me. So herself. Said her uncle claims it's too expensive. Marjorie frowned. That makes no sense. If he's her legal guardian, she should be covered under his insurance or state assistance. Exactly, Helen said. Something doesn't add up. Later that morning, Helen quietly observed Daisy during math lesson. The girl sat hunched at her desk, face pale and drawn. When the children broke into small groups, Daisy remained alone, pressing her hand against her stomach. Helen approached, kneeling beside her desk. How are you feeling today? Okay, Daisy whispered unconvincingly. Did you have breakfast? Daisy shook her head slightly. Would you like a granola bar from my desk? Helen offered. A small nod. Helen retrieved the snack, watching as Daisy took tiny, careful bites, as if savoring each morsel, or perhaps afraid of eating too quickly. Ms. Monroe? Daisy asked hesitantly. Are you really coming tomorrow? Absolutely, Helen promised. We'll read that story about the brave little turtle, remember? For the first time in weeks, a ghost of a smile touched Daisy's lips. The sight gave Helen renewed purpose. At lunch, Helen instituted a new routine. Daisy, would you like to be my special helper? You can eat lunch in the classroom while you help me organize the reading corner. The arrangement served multiple purposes, ensuring Daisy ate under Helen's supervision, building trust, and giving Helen more opportunities to document the child's condition. As the afternoon progressed, however, Daisy grew increasingly pale. During art class, she barely touched her crayons. By the final hour, she was visibly trembling, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool classroom. Daisy? Helen asked quietly, approaching her desk. Do you need to see the nurse? Before Daisy could answer, her eyes rolled back. Helen lunged forward just as the child slumped sideways, catching her before she hit the floor. Someone get the nurse! Helen called to her stunned class. Now! As concerned children gathered around, Helen cradled Daisy's limp form. The girl's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and confused. It's okay, Daisy, you're going to be okay, Helen whispered, though uncertainty gripped her heart. In the commotion, Daisy's backpack toppled from her desk. As Helen reached to steady it, the zipper opened, spilling its meager contents. Among the worn school supplies and tattered notebook was Daisy's lunchbox. It fell open, revealing only a ketchup packet and a slice of moldy bread. The school nurse arrived, quickly assessing the situation. Her eyes met Helen's over Daisy's pale form, both women recognizing the gravity of what they were witnessing. This was no longer just concern. This was an emergency. The ambulance's flashing lights reflected off the school windows as paramedics wheeled Daisy out on a stretcher. Helen walked alongside, holding the child's small hand. Daisy had regained consciousness but remained disoriented and weak. I'm coming with you, Helen told the paramedics, her tone leaving no room for argument. Are you family? One asked. I'm her teacher. Her guardian isn't answering his phone. This was true. Helen had tried Garrett's number repeatedly, with no response. She shouldn't be alone. The paramedic nodded, helping Helen into the ambulance. As they pulled away, Helen saw Principal Davis in the school doorway, his expression grim. He'd already heard about Helen's unauthorized home visit from Marjorie. This situation would only complicate matters, but Helen couldn't bring herself to care about administrative consequences. Not now. In the emergency room, doctors moved with urgent efficiency. Helen provided what information she could about Daisy's condition, while nurses started an IV to address severe dehydration. Her medical records indicate inflammatory bowel disease, a doctor informed Helen after examining Daisy. But it doesn't appear she's been receiving proper treatment. We're seeing signs of a serious flare-up, possibly complicated by malnutrition. Helen nodded, unsurprised but still heartbroken. Her uncle claims treatment is too expensive. The doctor's eyebrows rose. That's concerning. With proper insurance or state assistance, medication should be affordable. And without it, complications like this are inevitable. Helen watched as Daisy drifted into an exhausted sleep, her tiny frame dwarfed by the hospital bed. The stark white sheets only emphasized how pale and thin she'd become. 2 hours passed before Garrett Harmon burst into the emergency department, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, his charm replaced by convincing concern. "Where is she? Where's my niece?" he demanded at the nurse's station. A nurse directed him to Daisy's curtained area. When he saw Helen sitting beside the bed, he froze momentarily before composing himself. "Ms. Monroe," he said coolly, "I'm surprised to find you here." "Mr. Harmon," Helen replied evenly. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. I was in meetings. No phones allowed." His attention shifted to Daisy, his expression transforming into one of deep concern. "Oh, my poor girl. What happened?" "She collapsed at school," Helen explained. "The doctors say she's having a severe flare-up of her condition, complicated by malnutrition." Garrett's eyes narrowed slightly at Helen, before he turned to stroke Daisy's hair with theatrical tenderness. "My sweet Daisy, always so brave, never complains." The curtain parted as Dr. Reynolds entered. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Dr. Reynolds. We need to discuss your niece's condition." "Of course," Garrett replied, straightening his jacket. "Though perhaps privately." He glanced pointedly at Helen. "Actually," the doctor said, "as Daisy's primary physician during this emergency, I'd like to discuss her care with both of you. Ms. Monroe provided crucial information about Daisy's symptoms at school." Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. "Very well." Dr. Reynolds reviewed Daisy's test results, explaining the severity of her condition. "She's severely dehydrated and anemic. Her inflammatory markers are extremely elevated, indicating her disease is active and uncontrolled. According to our records, she hasn't had her prescription refilled in over 3 months. There must be some mistake," Garrett countered smoothly. "Daisy receives her medication regularly. Perhaps there's an issue with the pharmacy records." "Mr. Harmon," Dr. Reynolds said firmly, "Daisy's blood work tells a clear story. She has not been receiving proper treatment. Additionally, she shows signs of malnutrition." "That's absurd," Garrett scoffed. "She eats well. She's just a picky eater, like many children." Helen bit her tongue, the image of the moldy bread and ketchup packet vivid in her mind. "Mr. Harmon," Dr. Reynolds continued, "we need to admit Daisy for intravenous treatment and monitoring. She'll likely need to stay for several days." "Whatever she needs," Garrett agreed, the picture of a concerned guardian. "Cost is no object for family." As Dr. Reynolds left to arrange the admission, Garrett turned to Helen, his concerned facade disappearing the moment they were alone. "I don't appreciate your interference, Ms. Monroe," he said quietly, "nor your insinuations to the medical staff." "I haven't insinuated anything," Helen replied calmly. "I've simply shared my observations as Daisy's teacher." Garrett leaned closer. "Your observations exceed your professional boundaries. I could file a complaint for your unauthorized visit yesterday. And I could share my concerns about what I saw in your home with the authorities," Helen countered, refusing to be intimidated. Their standoff was interrupted by a young woman in a neat pantsuit who approached Daisy's bed. She observed the sleeping child before addressing them both. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Nina Patel from Hospital Social Services. I'd like to speak with you about Daisy's care plan and home situation." Garrett's expression immediately transformed back to concerned uncle. "Of course. Whatever helps my niece." As Garrett stepped away with Nina, Helen noticed the social worker slip her a business card discreetly. Something in Nina's eyes told Helen she might have found an ally in the system. Someone else who saw through Garrett's performance. For the first time since finding Daisy collapsed, Helen felt a flicker of hope. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at 7 p.m., as Helen stirred her cooling coffee. She'd stayed well past visiting hours, reluctant to leave Daisy alone with Garrett. Only when Nina Patel had assured her that hospital staff would closely monitor the situation did Helen finally agree to go home for some rest. "Mind if I join you?" Helen looked up to find Nina standing beside her table, holding a tray with a sandwich and apple. "Please," Helen gestured to the empty chair. "I was just about to leave." "Stay a few minutes?" Nina asked, sitting down. "I think we should talk." Helen nodded, studying the young social worker. There was a quiet determination in Nina's eyes that inspired confidence. "I've been reviewing Daisy's case," Nina said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure their privacy. "This isn't the first time concerns have been raised about the Williams children." "I know," Helen replied. "The school counselor mentioned a previous investigation." Nina nodded. 8 months ago. Everything appeared fine when our colleagues visited. Mr. Harmon presented all the right documentation, had explanations for everything. "He's convincing," Helen agreed. "But what I saw in that house—" "Tell me," Nina urged. "Every detail matters." Helen described her visit, the deplorable conditions, Daisy's role as caretaker, the children's hunger, Garrett's obvious neglect despite his apparent wealth. Nina took notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. The previous caseworker noted the disparity between Harmon's lifestyle and the children's basic needs, but couldn't prove financial exploitation. "Financial exploitation?" Helen repeated. Nina hesitated before responding. "I shouldn't share this, but I think you need to know what we're dealing with. Garrett Harmon receives significant financial support as the children's guardian. Social Security survivor benefits, a trust from their parents' life insurance, plus state assistance for Daisy's medical condition." Helen's eyes widened. "But he claimed her medication was too expensive." "Exactly," Nina said. "The funds designated for the children's care should more than cover proper food, housing, and medical treatment. Yet Daisy's eating moldy bread and wearing clothes 2 sizes too big." Helen finished, anger rising in her voice. Nina nodded grimly. "We need to build a strong case this time. Mr. Harmon is well connected and knows how to manipulate the system. He'll have Daisy looking healthy and happy before she's discharged." "What can I do?" Helen asked. "Document everything. Establish a consistent presence in Daisy's life so you can monitor her condition. And if possible, gather information about the younger siblings too." Helen thought of Toby and Charlie, still in Garrett's sole care. "What about the brothers? Shouldn't they be evaluated too?" "Ideally, yes," Nina agreed. "But without clear evidence of harm, we can't remove them. The system requires proof, not suspicion. Even with Daisy in this condition? He'll claim it's just her medical condition that was mismanaged, not overall neglect." Nina's frustration was evident. "I've seen cases like this before. We need to be strategic." After exchanging contact information, Helen finally headed home, her mind racing with plans. She'd continue her twice-weekly visits to help with Daisy's reading. She'd establish a lunch routine at school to ensure Daisy ate at least 1 good meal daily. Most importantly, she'd document everything meticulously. The following morning, Helen arrived at school early to meet with Principal Davis, who was understandably concerned about the situation. The district could face liability issues if Harmon decides to push back against your involvement, he warned. "I understand the risks," Helen replied, "but I can't ignore what's happening to these children." Davis sighed. "Just be careful, Helen. Follow protocols from now on, and keep me informed." Later that day, Helen established her new lunch routine with Daisy. The girl returned to school after 3 days in the hospital, looking marginally better but still too thin, too subdued. "Would you like to be my lunch helper this week?" Helen asked, presenting it as a privilege rather than charity. "We can eat in the classroom while you help me organize the book corner." Daisy nodded, clearly relieved, to avoid the noisy cafeteria. As they ate, Helen sharing her homemade soup and sandwich with the child, Helen gently encouraged conversation. "How are your brothers doing?" she asked casually. "Okay," Daisy replied. Mrs. Peterson from next door watched them while I was in the hospital. She gave them real meals. Helen made a mental note to contact this neighbor. And how are you feeling now? Better, Daisy said. The doctors gave me medicine that helped a lot. Uncle Garrett says I can take it every day now. That's good, Helen said, wondering how long that would last once medical attention wasn't actively focused on the family. Do you remember what your medicine is called? Daisy shook her head. It's blue pills. I'm supposed to take them morning and night. Over the following days, Helen observed Daisy carefully. The child did seem improved, more alert, and less pain, but still far too serious, too responsible for her age. The lunch routine continued, and Helen made sure Daisy always had an extra granola bar to save for later that Helen suspected went to Toby. 2 weeks after Daisy's hospitalization, during one of their lunch sessions, the little girl finally began to truly open. Ms. Monroe, Daisy asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Can I tell you something important? Of course, sweetheart. Anything. Daisy glanced nervously at the closed classroom door before leaning closer. If I tell anyone what it's really like at home, she whispered, they might take my brothers away from me. The fear and desperation in those young eyes broke Helen's heart all over again. I promise, Daisy, Helen said softly, looking directly into the child's worried eyes. Whatever you tell me, I'll do everything I can to keep you and your brothers together. That's my goal too. Daisy studied Helen's face, searching for signs of deception with a shrewdness no 6-year-old should possess. Finally, something in Helen's expression seemed to convince her. Before Mom and Dad, Daisy began, then paused, swallowing hard. Before they went to heaven, Mom made me promise to always look after Toby and Charlie. She said we had to stay together no matter what. Helen nodded encouragingly. That's a big responsibility for someone your age. Uncle Garrett wasn't supposed to be our forever person, Daisy continued, her voice dropping even lower. Mom said if anything happened, we'd go to Aunt Susan. But Uncle Garrett told the judge that Aunt Susan couldn't take care of us properly. This was new information. You have an aunt? Your mother's sister? Daisy nodded. She lives far away. Uncle Garrett said she's too poor to have us, and the judge believed him because he has a big house and lots of money. Her small face hardened with an expression too bitter for her years. But he doesn't spend the money on us. He says we're expensive problems. Helen fought to keep her expression neutral despite the anger flaring inside her. Do you ever hear from your Aunt Susan? She sent birthday cards, but Uncle Garrett threw them away. He said she was trying to make trouble. Daisy's eyes welled with tears. I miss her. She smelled like cookies and always sang funny songs with Toby. Helen made a mental note to ask Nina about locating this aunt. If there was a blood relative willing to care for the children, that could be their best chance for staying together. Daisy, would you recognize your aunt's handwriting? Or remember her address? Daisy shook her head sadly. Uncle Garrett never let me see the cards. He just showed me before he tore them up. Helen switched tactics. What about your medication? Are you still taking it every day? A shadow crossed Daisy's face. Not anymore. Uncle Garrett said the hospital made a mistake, that I'm fine now and don't need expensive medicine. She pressed a hand to her stomach. But it hurts. Again, almost every day. Helen documented this in her notebook, anger building. The hospital discharge instructions had been explicit about Daisy's need for daily medication. Does Uncle Garrett take you to the doctor for checkups? Only when the school or social workers say I have to go, Daisy admitted. He gets really nice before those visits. We get new clothes and he buys groceries and tells us what to say. Her eyes dropped to her lap. He says if I tell the truth, bad people will take Toby and Charlie away, and I'll never see them again. The manipulation was as cruel as it was effective. Garrett was using Daisy's love for her brothers to ensure her silence. After school that day, Helen called Nina to share what she'd learned. The social worker sounded equally disturbed. That matches what I've been uncovering, Nina said. I've been researching Garrett's background. This isn't the first time he's assumed guardianship of children with financial assets. What do you mean? Helen asked, alarmed. 5 years ago, he became guardian to a teenage nephew after the boy's parents died in a boating accident. The boy had a substantial trust fund. By the time he aged out of Garrett's care, the trust was mysteriously depleted. That can't be legal, Helen protested. It's complicated, Nina explained. Guardians have significant latitude in financial management. Without clear evidence of fraud, it's difficult to prove misappropriation. Helen thought of Daisy's mention of an aunt. Daisy said they were supposed to go to her mother's sister, Susan, but Garrett convinced a judge otherwise. Could we locate her? I'll look into it, Nina promised. A blood relative willing to take all 3 children would be ideal. The next day, Helen approached Mrs. Green, who had taught 2nd grade at Pinewood for over 30 years. If anyone might have insight into Daisy's situation, it would be her. Williams, Mrs. Green repeated when Helen mentioned Daisy's name. Any relation to Caroline Williams, who was in my class about 25 years ago? I'm not sure, Helen admitted. Daisy's mother is deceased. I don't know her name. Mrs. Green rummaged through an old photo album she kept in her classroom. Here, she said, pointing to a class picture. Caroline Williams. She grew up in that old Victorian on Maple Road, the same house where Daisy lives now. Helen studied the photo of a smiling blonde girl, noting the resemblance to Daisy. Do you know what happened to her? She married a nice young man, James, I believe. They moved away for his job. Mrs. Green frowned. I heard she passed away recently. Very sad. She peered at Helen curiously. Why the interest in ancient history? Just trying to understand Daisy's background, Helen said vaguely. She's having a difficult time. Later that afternoon, Helen visited the school's records office. With a little persuasion, she gained access to Daisy's emergency contact information from the previous year. There, listed as a secondary contact but crossed out with a note indicating no longer authorized per legal guardian, was Susan Reynolds, with an address in Oregon. Helen carefully copied down the information. One more piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. That evening, as Helen reviewed her growing file of notes and observations, she pulled out old class photos. In Daisy's kindergarten picture from the previous year, the child smiled brightly, her cheeks round and healthy, her eyes sparkling. The contrast with the hollow-eyed, frail child in her classroom now was shocking. The evidence was mounting, but Helen knew they needed more to overcome Garrett's manipulations of the system. They needed irrefutable proof. The medical offices of Dr. Eleanor Zhang were decorated with cheerful artwork and toys designed to put young patients at ease. Helen sat in the waiting area, pretending to read a magazine while actually watching Garrett and Daisy across the room. Nina had arranged this appointment with a pediatric gastroenterologist, ensuring Helen would, coincidentally, be there with another student. Garrett maintained his concerned uncle facade, one arm draped protectively around Daisy's thin shoulders. The child sat unnaturally still, wearing a clean dress and neatly brushed hair, a stark contrast to her usual appearance at school. When the nurse called Daisy's name, Garrett stood, then noticed Helen. His smile tightened. Ms. Monroe. What a surprise. Mr. Harmon, Helen nodded politely. Daisy, how are you feeling today? Before Daisy could answer, Garrett steered her toward the examination room. We shouldn't keep the doctor waiting. Helen waited until they disappeared down the hallway before approaching the receptionist. Excuse me, I'm Daisy. William's teacher. Her social worker asked me to provide the doctor with some observations about Daisy's symptoms at school. The receptionist hesitated. I'm not sure. Nina Patel from Children's Services arranged it, Helen added. This wasn't entirely true, but Nina had suggested Helen find a way to speak directly with Daisy's doctor. After a brief call to verify with Nina, the receptionist directed Helen to Dr. Zhang's office to wait. 20 minutes later, Dr. Zhang entered, reviewing notes on her tablet. Ms. Monroe, I understand you have information about Daisy Williams. Helen nodded. I've documented her symptoms at school for the past month. She handed over her carefully prepared report. She frequently complains of stomach pain, often doesn't eat, and was hospitalized recently after collapsing in my classroom. Dr. Zhang reviewed the notes with a deepening frown. This contradicts what her uncle just told me. He claims her symptoms have almost completely resolved with the treatment prescribed during her hospitalization. He's not being truthful, Helen said carefully. Daisy told me he stopped giving her medication, saying she didn't need it anymore. Dr. Zhang's expression grew serious. That's extremely concerning. Untreated IBD can lead to dangerous complications, especially in young children. She hesitated before adding, I'm also troubled by her weight and growth charts. She's fallen significantly below her previous percentiles. She's not getting, proper nutrition at home, Helen confirmed. I've been providing lunch at school, but that's only 5 meals a week. I'll need to address this directly with Mr. Harmon, Dr. Zhang said, and I'll be filing a report with Children's Services. Her caseworker is Nina Patel, Helen provided. She's already involved, but needs more medical documentation to build a case. When Garrett and Daisy emerged from the examination room, Dr. Zhang asked Garrett to step into her office, suggesting Daisy wait with the nurse. Helen glimpsed Daisy's worried expression as she was led away. 15 minutes. Later, Garrett stormed out of Dr. Zhang's office, his charming mask completely dropped. He spotted Helen in the waiting area, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. You, he hissed, approaching her. You're interfering again. Helen stood her ground. I'm advocating for a child in my care. You've overstepped for the last time, Garrett warned, keeping his voice low despite his obvious rage. I know people in this town, Ms. Monroe. Important people. Your career won't survive this meddling. Before Helen could respond, Dr. Zhang appeared with Daisy, handing Garrett a prescription and written instructions. Mr. Harmon, as I explained, Daisy's condition requires consistent treatment. I've scheduled a follow-up appointment for next week to ensure the medication is working properly. Garrett's demeanor instantly transformed back to concerned guardian. Of course, doctor. Daisy's health is, my primary concern. As they left, Daisy glanced back at Helen, her eyes communicating a silent message of both gratitude and fear. That evening, Helen met Nina at a quiet cafe to compare notes. The social worker had news of her own. I found Susan Reynolds, Nina said, sliding a folder across the board table. She's the children's maternal aunt living in Portland. According to my sources, she actively sought custody after her sister's death but was denied when Garrett presented evidence that she was financially unstable and had mental health issues. Was any of it true? Helen asked. Nina shook her head. Susan Reynolds is an elementary school librarian with a stable job, owns her home, and has no history of mental health diagnoses. She's single, which might have worked against her compared to Garrett's presentation as a successful businessman offering a 2-parent home. 2-parent? Helen repeated. Garrett is single. Not according to the custody hearing transcripts, Nina said grimly. He brought a woman who testified as his fiancée, claiming they were planning to marry and raise the children together. The judge found this persuasive. Let me guess. No marriage ever happened? Correct. The fiancé disappeared from the picture immediately after custody was granted. Helen absorbed this information, her determination growing. We need to contact Susan Reynolds. Already done, Nina said. She's been trying to maintain contact with the children, but says Garrett blocks her efforts. She's coming to town next week. As they continued strategizing, Helen's phone buzzed with an email. It was from Principal Davis, marked urgent. Please see me first thing tomorrow regarding a complaint from Garrett Harmon. The battle lines were being drawn more clearly. Now, Garrett was fighting back just as Helen had expected, but she wasn't backing down. Not when 3 children's futures hung in the balance. Nina seemed to read her thoughts. Be careful, Helen. Men like Garrett don't play fair. Neither do I, Helen replied. When it comes to protecting children, Principal Davis's office felt unusually cold that morning, as Helen sat across from his desk, hands folded in her lap. His expression was troubled as he slid a formal letter toward her. Garrett Harmon has filed a complaint alleging unprofessional conduct and harassment, he explained, his tone carefully neutral. He claims you've made unauthorized home visits, interfered with medical appointments, and are creating emotional distress for Daisy. Helen read the letter, noting the legal letterhead from one of the city's most prestigious firms. None of this is accurate, James. You know that. Davis sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. I know you're concerned about Daisy, Helen. So am I. But Harmon is threatening legal action against both you and the district. He's trying to intimidate us because we're getting close to the truth, Helen insisted. Perhaps, Davis acknowledged, but we need to proceed carefully. The superintendent suggests you step back from direct involvement with the Williams case. Helen straightened in her chair. You want me to abandon Daisy after everything I've documented? Not abandon, Davis corrected quickly. Just maintain a strictly professional teacher-student relationship while the district legal team reviews the situation. Helen was about to protest when her phone buzzed with a text from Nina. Breakthrough. Need to meet ASAP. Looking up at Principal Davis, Helen made a quick decision. I understand the district's position, she said carefully. I'll be more mindful of boundaries. Davis seemed relieved by her apparent compliance. Thank you, Helen. I know your intentions are good. An hour later, Helen met Nina at the hospital cafeteria. The social worker wasn't alone. Beside her sat a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that immediately reminded Helen of Daisy. Helen, this is Margaret Wilkins, Nina introduced. She used to be a caseworker with Children's Services. Margaret extended her hand. I've heard a lot about you, Ms. Monroe. I wish more teachers showed your level of commitment. Margaret was assigned to a previous case involving Garrett Harmon, Nina explained, one that never made it into the official record. Helen's interest was immediately piqued. What happened? Margaret glanced around before leaning forward. 5 years ago, I investigated concerns about Garrett's nephew, Tyler Harmon. The situation was strikingly similar to what you're describing with Daisy, a child with assets being neglected while Garrett lived comfortably. What happened with the investigation? Helen asked. Margaret's expression darkened. It was shut down. Suddenly, I was removed from the case. My supervisor cited lack of evidence and potential bias. Within a week, the file was closed. Did you ever find out why? Nina asked. Not officially, Margaret replied. But unofficially, Garrett Harmon has powerful friends, the kind who make phone calls to department heads and elected officials. Helen processed this information. So the system failed Tyler, just like it's failing Daisy and her brothers. I've regretted my inability to help that boy ever since, Margaret admitted. When Nina contacted me about the Williams children, I knew I had to speak up. I still have my original notes from Tyler's case, the ones that never made it into the official file. This was the breakthrough they needed, evidence of a pattern, proof that Garrett's manipulation of the system wasn't an isolated incident. Would you be willing to make an official statement now? Nina asked. Margaret nodded firmly. I'm retired. They can't threaten my job anymore, and I've been waiting for a chance to make this right. The meeting with Margaret gave Helen renewed determination. Back at school, she maintained her daily lunch routine with Daisy, careful to keep their conversations casual while still monitoring the child's condition. 3 days after the meeting with Margaret, Daisy didn't come to school. Helen's immediate call to the house went unanswered. By the next day, when Daisy still hadn't returned, Helen's worry transformed into full-blown alarm. She called Nina immediately. Daisy's missed 2 days of school, no call from Garrett, no response when I try to contact him. That's concerning, Nina agreed, especially with the doctor's appointment scheduled for tomorrow. Let me see if I can do a welfare check. Later that afternoon, Nina called back. I just left the Harmon house. Garrett claims Daisy has a stomach virus. He was extremely resistant to letting me see her, but eventually relented. "How did she look?" Helen asked anxiously. "Not good," Nina admitted. "Pale, lethargic. He's claiming it's just a virus. But given her condition, I've insisted on a medical evaluation. An ambulance is taking her to Children's Hospital now." Helen's heart raced. "I'm on my way." "There's more," Nina added, her voice grave. "Susan Reynolds arrived in town this morning. She's already contacted family court about revisiting the custody arrangement. I think Garrett may be panicking." At Children's Hospital, Helen found Nina in the emergency waiting area. Together they watched through a window as doctors examined Daisy. The child looked even worse than during her previous hospitalization, her skin gray-tinged, her eyes sunken. Dr. Reynolds, the emergency physician, emerged from Daisy's room with a deeply troubled expression. "Ms. Patel, Ms. Monroe, may I speak with you?" They followed him to a quiet consultation room. "Daisy's condition is serious," he began without preamble. "Her IBD has flared severely, likely due to medication non-compliance. But there's something else concerning us." "What is it?" Helen asked, her throat tight with fear. "Her blood work shows abnormalities that suggest possible deliberate medication mismanagement," the doctor explained carefully. "The levels don't match what we'd expect if she were simply not taking her prescribed medicine." Nina leaned forward. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm not making accusations," Dr. Reynolds clarified, "but I am reporting my concerns to the proper authorities, and I'm admitting Daisy immediately. She's not leaving this hospital until we get to the bottom of this." For the first time since Helen had found Daisy cleaning that mansion floor, she felt the tide beginning to turn. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed unusually harsh as Helen paced outside Daisy's room. Inside, a nurse monitored the sleeping child, who was now connected to IV lines delivering fluids, nutrients, and medication. The immediate crisis had been stabilized, but the road to recovery would be long. Garrett had arrived an hour after Daisy's admission, performing his concerned guardian routine flawlessly for the hospital staff. Now he stood at the nurse's station, his voice carrying down the hallway as he demanded updates and questioned treatment decisions with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Helen watched him warily. Something had changed in Garrett's demeanor, a new edge of desperation beneath his usual controlled facade. He knew they were closing in. Nina approached, her expression grim as she ended a phone call. "That was my supervisor. Garrett has filed a formal complaint against me for harassment and unprofessional conduct. He's demanding I be removed from the case." "Can they do that?" Helen asked, alarmed. "They're reviewing the situation," Nina replied. "But in the meantime, I've been instructed to limit contact with the family." Helen felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly what had happened to Margaret Wilkins years ago, the system being manipulated to protect Garrett rather than the children. "What about Toby and Charlie?" Helen asked. "Who's monitoring their welfare if you're sidelined?" "Another caseworker will be assigned," Nina said, frustration evident in her voice. "Someone who doesn't know the case history, who might be more easily charmed by Garrett." Helen's phone buzzed with an email notification. When she read it, her heart sank. "The superintendent has placed me on administrative leave pending investigation of Garrett's complaint, effective immediately." Nina squeezed Helen's arm sympathetically. "He's trying to remove everyone who's advocating for Daisy. But why now?" "What's changed?" "Susan Reynolds," Nina answered. "Her petition to re-examine custody has been accepted by the court. There's a hearing scheduled for next week. Garrett stands to lose not just the children, but the financial benefits that come with them." As they spoke, the elevator doors opened and Principal Davis stepped out, his expression solemn as he spotted Helen. "I tried to prevent this," he said without preamble. "The decision came from above me." "I understand," Helen replied, though her disappointment was evident. "There's more," Davis added, lowering his voice. "The local paper ran an article this morning. It portrays Garrett as a devoted guardian being harassed by overzealous school officials. He handed Helen a folded newspaper. The headline made her stomach clench. Local businessman claims witch hunt by elementary school teacher. The article quoted sources close to the EI school board, describing Helen as having a history of boundary issues and inappropriate attachments to students. None of it was true, but the damage to her reputation was done. As Helen processed this development, a veteran nurse approached their small group. She glanced around to ensure Garrett wasn't nearby before speaking. I don't normally get involved in these situations, she said quietly. But you should know, Mr. Harmon was asking about discharge plans already. He mentioned relocating the family to stay with relatives in another state. The implication was clear. Garrett was planning to flee with the children before the custody hearing. As if the situation couldn't get worse, Helen noticed a familiar face at the end of the corridor. Mrs. Peterson, the veteran teacher who had warned her earlier. The older woman pulled Helen aside, her expression grave. Garrett destroyed Miss Louise's career, she whispered urgently. Don't get involved. In the span of a single day, everything had unraveled. Helen and Nina were being systematically removed from Daisy's life. Garrett was preparing to disappear with the children. The community and school system had turned against them. For the first time since she'd begun this fight, Helen felt truly defeated. The rain pattered against Helen's kitchen window as she sat at her table, surrounded by documents, notes, and photographs. Though officially on administrative leave, she wouldn't abandon Daisy and her brothers now. Not when they were so close to breaking through Garrett's carefully constructed facade. Her doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Nina standing there alongside a woman she didn't recognize, tall, with auburn hair and Daisy's blue eyes. Helen, this is Susan Reynolds, Nina introduced. Daisy's aunt. Please come in, Helen said, ushering them out of the rain. Susan's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her handshake was firm. Thank you for fighting for my sister's children when no one else would. Over cups of steaming tea, Susan shared her story, how she'd tried desperately to gain custody after her sister's death, only to be painted as unstable and unfit by Garrett's expensive lawyers. Caroline and I were so close, Susan explained, her voice breaking slightly. She made me promise that if anything ever happened, I'd care for her. Children. But Garrett, he appeared out of nowhere with his legal team and his false witnesses. Why would he want the children? Helen asked. From everything I've seen, he resents their presence. Money, Susan said simply. Caroline and James had substantial life insurance policies, plus a trust. Fund for the children's education. As guardian, Garrett controls it all until they're 18. The pieces were falling into place. Garrett's neglect wasn't mere indifference, it was calculated. Every dollar not spent on the children's care was $1 in his pocket. We need to move quickly, Nina interjected. My supervisor is reassigning Daisy's case tomorrow, and according to hospital sources, Garrett is pushing for discharge, claiming he has specialists waiting in Arizona. He's planning to run, Helen concluded grimly. Exactly, Nina agreed. Once he crosses state lines with the children, establishing a new case will take months, even with Susan's custody petition pending. Helen stood up decisively. Then we need to ensure Daisy doesn't leave that hospital until the custody hearing. For the next hour, they formulated a plan, a coordinated effort to protect the children, using every legal and procedural tool at their disposal. Susan would file for emergency temporary custody based on Daisy's medical crisis. Nina would fast-track the documentation from Dr. Jang and the hospital physicians. Helen would compile her evidence of neglect into a comprehensive report. What about your job? Susan asked Helen. You've risked so much already. Helen smiled sadly. Some things matter more than a career. These children only have one childhood. They can't wait for the system to eventually get it right. As Susan and Nina prepared to leave, Helen's phone rang. It was Dr. Reynolds from the hospital. Ms. Monroe, I thought you should know. Mr. Harmon is here with discharge papers and a medical transport service. He's claiming to have arrangements at a specialty clinic in Phoenix. Helen's heart raced. Dr. Reynolds, please. There's a custody hearing next week. These children aren't safe with him. There was a pause before the doctor responded. I understand. As Daisy's physician, I can delay discharge if I believe it's medically necessary. Another pause. Which, given her condition and incomplete treatment, I do. How long can you hold him off? Helen asked. 48 hours, maybe 72 if we run additional tests, Dr. Reynolds replied. After that, without a court order. We'll have one, Helen promised. Thank you. As she ended the call, Helen turned to Nina and Susan with renewed determination. Garrett's making his move now. We have 3 days at most. Susan straightened, a new resolve hardening her gentle features. Then we have work to do. For the first time in days, hope flickered back to life. The path forward was fraught with obstacles, but they weren't fighting alone anymore. They had truth on their side, and the determination of 3 women who refused to let these children become another statistic, another failure of a system meant to protect them. That night, as Helen organized her documentation for the emergency hearing, she came across Daisy's class picture from the beginning of the year. The child's solemn eyes seemed to look directly at her, asking a silent question. Will you really stay? Yes, Helen whispered to the photograph. This time someone is staying long enough to help. The family court waiting area was filled with tense silence as Helen sat beside Susan and Nina. 2 days of frantic preparation had led to this moment, an emergency hearing before Judge Eleanor Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach to children's welfare cases. Down the hallway, Garrett paced with his attorney, an imposing man in an expensive suit who kept shooting confident glances their way. The hospital had managed to delay Daisy's discharge through additional testing, but their medical justification was running thin. Everything now hinged on this hearing. What if he convinces them again? Susan whispered, anxiety etched on her face. He's so good at manipulating people. This time we have evidence, Helen reassured her, though her own heart raced with uncertainty. Real evidence, not just suspicions. The courtroom doors opened and a clerk called their case. As they filed in, Helen spotted Margaret Wilkins and Dr. Jang already seated in the gallery. Their presence bolstered her confidence. They weren't alone in this fight. Judge Martinez surveyed the assembled parties with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. After preliminary introductions, she addressed Garrett's attorney directly. Mr. Donovan, I understand your client objects to this emergency hearing. Please, explain your position. The attorney rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a baseless attempt to interfere with Mr. Harmon's guardianship. My client has been these children's legal guardian for over a year, appointed by this very court. He's arranged specialized medical care for his niece in Arizona and needs to proceed with her treatment plan without further delay. Judge Martinez turned to Susan's attorney, a determined woman named Rachel Winters, who had taken the case pro bono after hearing the circumstances. Ms. Winters, what evidence do you present that warrants emergency intervention? Rachel approached the bench, presenting 3 folders. Your Honor, we have documented evidence of ongoing medical neglect, financial exploitation, and false statements made to this court during the original guardianship hearing. For the next hour, witnesses presented testimony that painted a devastating picture of Garrett's guardianship. Dr. Jang detailed Daisy's untreated medical condition, despite funds being available for care. Margaret Wilkins described the pattern of behavior she'd witnessed with Garrett's previous ward. Nina presented documentation of the financial discrepancies between the children's entitled benefits and their actual living conditions. When Helen's turn came, she spoke directly and clearly, describing what she'd witnessed in the home and Daisy's deteriorating condition at school. As she spoke, she noticed Garrett's confident smirk gradually fading. The most powerful testimony, however, came unexpectedly. Judge Martinez had ordered that Toby and Charlie be brought to the courthouse, where court-appointed physicians examined them. The doctor's findings, both children showing signs of malnutrition and delayed development, corroborated everything Helen and the others had reported. As the evidence mounted, Garrett leaned over to whisper urgently to his attorney, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Martinez called a brief recess before making her ruling. In the hallway, Helen watched as several officials approached. Garrett, their expressions serious. Something significant was happening. When court resumed, Garrett's attorney requested to approach the bench. After a hushed conference, Judge Martinez addressed the courtroom. In light of new information presented to the court, Mr. Harmon has agreed to temporarily relinquish guardianship of the Williams children pending a full investigation. A wave of relief washed over Helen, but the judge wasn't finished. The children will be placed in emergency foster care while the court evaluates Ms. Reynolds' petition for permanent guardianship. Additionally, I am ordering a full audit of the children's financial accounts. As the judge detailed her orders, 2 social workers entered the courtroom to take custody of Toby and Charlie, who had been waiting with a court assistant. When the toddler spotted Garrett, his reaction stunned everyone present. "Uncle Garrett will be mad if I leave," he cried, clinging to the social worker in fear rather than affection. The baby, too young to understand, simply reached for Garrett's shirt, the only adult figure he recognized. The complexity of these reactions, not love, but traumatic bonding, silenced the courtroom. Even Judge Martinez seemed affected as she watched the children's distress. "Ms. Reynolds," the judge said softly, "may approach the children." Susan moved forward slowly, kneeling to Toby's level. "Hello, Toby. Do you remember me? I'm your Aunt Susan." The boy studied her cautiously. "You sang the dinosaur song?" Susan's eyes filled with tears. "That's right, the dinosaur song. Would you like to hear it again?" A tiny nod from Toby broke the tension in the room. As Susan began softly singing, something in the little boy's expression shifted. A glimmer of recognition, of safety remembered. In that moment, Helen knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, these children had finally found their way home. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over Daisy's bed, where she sat propped against pillows, looking at a picture book with her Aunt Susan. The change in the little girl after just 1 week was remarkable. Her eyes brighter, her voice stronger, her smiles more frequent, though still cautious. Helen paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before announcing her presence. "Knock, knock, is this a good time for visitors?" Daisy looked up, her face lighting with a genuine smile. "Ms. Monroe." "I brought someone who's been missing you," Helen said, stepping aside to reveal Nina, who entered carrying a small bag. "How's our brave girl today?" Nina asked, setting the bag on Daisy's bedside table. "The doctor says I'm getting better," Daisy reported proudly. "My special numbers are going up." "Her inflammation markers are improving," Susan translated. "The consistent medication is finally working." Helen sat at the foot of Daisy's bed. "That's wonderful news, and I brought some good news too." She reached into her tote bag, pulling out a colorful card. "Your classmates made this for you. Everyone signed it." Daisy accepted the card with wonder, tracing the drawings and signatures with her finger. For a child who had been isolated for so long, this tangible evidence of belonging clearly meant the world. While Daisy examined her card, the adults stepped into the hallway for a quick conference. "How are Toby and Charlie adjusting?" Helen asked Susan. "Better than expected," Susan replied. "The foster family is wonderful, experienced with trauma cases. Toby's started talking more, and Charlie's sleeping through the night now that he's properly fed." Nina had updates of her own. "The financial investigation is revealing exactly what we suspected. Garrett diverted most of the children's benefits to his personal accounts. The prosecutor is considering criminal charges." "What about the custody situation?" Helen asked. "The judge has expedited my petition," Susan explained. "Given the circumstances, they're prioritizing keeping the siblings together in family placement." Her voice wavered slightly. "I've been approved for temporary guardianship while the final evaluation is completed." This was the best possible news, but Helen noticed the tension still visible in Susan's shoulders. "What is it? What's worrying you?" Susan sighed. "It's practical matters now. I have a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland. I'll need to find a larger place, transfer my job. The logistics are overwhelming." "You don't have to figure it all out alone," Nina assured her. "There are transitional support services available." From inside the room, they heard Daisy call out, "Aunt Susan, can I show Ms. Monroe my journal?" They returned to find Daisy holding a notebook decorated with butterfly stickers, a gift from the child psychologist who'd been working with her. "The doctor said I should write down my feelings," Daisy explained seriously, "even the scary ones." With solemn ceremony, she opened the journal to a page filled with a child's careful printing and colorful drawings. The entry described her daily routine at Garrett's house, waking before sunrise to prepare bottles for Charlie, cleaning while the boys slept, saving food from her own meager portions to ensure Toby had enough. Helen struggled to maintain her composure as she read the matter-of-fact account of responsibilities no 6-year-old should ever have borne. What struck her most wasn't the neglect itself, but how Daisy had normalized it, believing this was simply what was expected of her. "Dr. Melissa says none of it was my job," Daisy said, watching Helen's reaction carefully. "She says children are supposed to play and learn and grow, not be little grown-ups." "Dr. Melissa is absolutely right," Helen confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "But who will take care of Toby and Charlie if I don't?" Daisy asked, her real fear finally emerging. Susan gently took her niece's hand. "That's what grown-ups like me are for, sweetheart. Your job now is just to be a little girl." The concept seemed foreign to Daisy, who frowned in concentration. "I don't remember how to just be a little girl." "That's okay," Helen assured her. "You'll learn again, and you have lots of people to help you." As if. On cue, Dr. Jang entered with her clipboard and a warm smile. "Good news, Daisy. If your blood tests tomorrow look as good as today's, you can leave the hospital on Friday." "I can go home with Aunt Susan?" Daisy asked, hope and anxiety mingling in her voice. "That's the plan," Dr. Jang confirmed. "With regular checkups, of course." After the doctor left, Daisy grew quieter, picking at a loose thread on her blanket. "What if Uncle Garrett comes back?" she finally whispered, giving voice to the fear that had been haunting her. The adults exchanged glances, understanding the depth of the child's anxiety. "He won't be able to," Nina explained gently. "The court has ordered him to stay away from you and your brothers." "And I promise," Susan added, taking Daisy's small hand between both of hers, "I will never, ever let anyone hurt you again. That's my job now." For the first time, since Helen had known her, Daisy's shoulders relaxed completely, as though finally setting down an impossible burden. The road to recovery, physical, emotional, and legal, stretched before them. But today, in this sunlit hospital room, Helen saw something she had been waiting months to see. The beginning of Daisy's childhood, finally reclaimed. 6 months later, Helen stood in the doorway of her classroom, watching as children filed in for the new school year. When a familiar blonde head appeared, her heart swelled with joy. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe," Daisy called, bouncing on her toes, with excitement that would have been unimaginable half a year ago. "Good morning, Daisy," Helen replied, taking in the transformation before her. The hollow-eyed child of last year was gone, replaced by a vibrant 7-year-old with rosy cheeks and a sparkle in her blue eyes. Her hair was neatly braided, her clothes bright and well-fitted, and most importantly, she carried herself with the lightness of a child who knew she was safe and loved. Susan had relocated to their town, finding work at the local library and renting a cheerful house with a backyard where the children could play. Toby had started preschool, flourishing under consistent care, while Charlie was hitting all his developmental milestones right on schedule. As for Garrett, the legal system had finally caught up with him. Faced with overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and child neglect, he had accepted a plea deal that included restitution, and prevented him from ever serving as a guardian again. After school that day, Helen visited the park where Susan had brought all 3 children to play. While Toby climbed on the jungle gym and Susan pushed Charlie on the infant swing, Daisy ran across the grass, her arms outstretched. High above her, dancing on the autumn breeze, a blue kite soared, the one Helen had given her to celebrate her official adoption by Susan. Daisy's laughter rang out, clear and unburdened, as she looked upward at the kite instead of down at the ground. In that perfect moment, with the little girl's face turned toward the endless sky, Helen knew that some battles, no matter how difficult, were always worth fighting.